So welcome back to Mind Games TV. I guess that's what I'm going to be calling my vlog series. This, I guess, is number 2 of the new Mind Games TV. I think I had one other episode out that was kind of like a trial thing, just to see what I was doing earlier. But anyway, I talked last video about my experience coaching CLG, or rather being CLG sports psychologist, and kind of what it was like to work with them through the split and a little bit before. And by the way, there's a really great reflections that just came out with Thorin and with Skara, and he talks a lot about CLG and his coaching there. And I'm not going to touch on any of the comments that he made. I think he's really insightful, obviously. But today I wanted to talk about something that's very dear to my heart, which is also something that's a little bit of a hot topic right now, and that is Sandbox mode. So just to put it in context, myself and much of the community has been waiting for Sandbox mode in League of Legends for a number of years. And especially once esports started to become big, I think all of us were kind of expecting Sandbox mode to follow shortly after for things like training, etc. And then recently Riot Games came out with a statement like, oh, it's not one of their priorities, and it kind of shocked the community and caused this big meme or kind of outrage or whatever that was happening. And I wanted to talk from a sports psychological perspective and from a sport anthropological perspective why it is that Sandbox mode I think is very interesting. And from a anthropological standpoint, I'm going to be basing a lot of my research on Alan Gutman, who wrote the book From Ritual to Record and is one of the leading kind of canon researchers in the history of sport and kind of what it is that makes sport and what transition sport goes through as it becomes sportified in a way, as an activity becomes sportified. So if you want to read more on this topic, then I actually think I have a video on my old YouTube channel, it might be this one, related to that, a paper that deals with esport in the framework of Alan Gutman's definition of what sport is. But otherwise, you can go read his book, and I'll also put up a link in this video to a PhD dissertation on esport that applies Alan Gutman's model and looks at kind of like the advancement of esport and where it stands. And this was about 2 or 3 years ago, I believe. So first of all, one of the key factors in Gutman's kind of dissection of how it is that an activity becomes culturally accepted as a sport is that eventually the sport acquires discrete training methods, which means that it is trained in other ways than doing the sport. So one example of that would be like hockey, where you would go and skate a bunch in circles and lift in the weight room and do team building activities, and then that would make you somehow better at hockey on the ice. And this is a process that things like activities go through as it becomes more important to win them, as more and more people rely on that thing, and it's seen kind of like as a factor that is found in pretty much all sports that have made it to the sport status. So when you look at something like esport, we can see this already happening in League of Legends, where people even a few years ago would do reaction training drills in their browser. And nowadays we see it much more in terms of like physical training outside and away from the computer to become stronger, mental training outside and away from the computer, like through me, to become more mentally tough, and then like things like team building and nutrition and these ways that you can kind of like improve your performance outside of that. But one thing that's really been missing is the ability to do drills. So without fulfilling the entire scrimmage or like playing the actual game, being able to take components of that game apart and run drills on them. And the reason that pretty much all sports and things like warfare and whatever all have the ability to run drills, and the reason people do them, is because motor-based skill learning is statistical. So what I mean by that is sport, one of the things that separates, for example, chess from something like League of Legends is that in chess, aside from the fact that you have to move pieces around in blitz chess like really fast, there really is no motor skill component. So if you are, say, a chess analyst, like an amazing analyst who can think as fast as a grandmaster, you can also play as fast as a grandmaster if you can think at that speed. Let's say you're an amazing analyst in League of Legends. You can think at the speed of an actual like professional player. You still won't be able to play with them because the component of skill in League of Legends is the motor neuron activity, where you see a visual stimuli and then you have a motor reaction to that, which is the appropriate decision at that time. And that is a trained skill. That's something that you train in your brain through repetition. It builds a motor neuron pathway and like reinforces those neurons and grows them. And then at the end, you have a skill and you slightly improve it by like pushing the boundaries of that skill. So for humans, what that means is that if we can take a skill and break it out and put it in a little petri dish and repeat it over and over and over again, we can get better at that skill. And so what it comes down to is sheer statistics. The more that you're actually able to repeat that skill in its perfect form, the quicker you're able to write that pathway in your brain and erase the other one, which is the real problem here, is that you have an old way of doing it, which is worse, and you're trying to replace it with a new way of doing it, which is kind of like, let's say that you have two paths going through a wood. One of them is like a clear-cut path, and the other one is like this little meandering, like, can't even see it half the time path. Like, when an impulse comes up to a pathway like that, it takes the road more traveled by. Okay, it goes down the big, gigantic highway, because those are the neurons which more quickly receive the charge that is required to like send the impulse along their axon to the next dendrite. And so it's rather difficult to force yourself to take the road less traveled by, or it's rather difficult to force the electricity to do it, as you would say. And so being able to repeat that over and over and over again starts to build up that, like, put traffic down that less traveled path and make it more trodden, so that when a pressure situation hits, then you automatically do the thing that you are like, that is most likely to happen. And if it's the previous old skill, which is like really well clear cut, then there's no competition from the one that's less trodden. Okay, so I'm taking the analogy a little too far here, but basically repetition is God. And so the situation now is that in the current situation of League of Legends, you can only repeat skills at random in a competition setting. And this is completely far from ideal, because you cannot recreate team fights. You cannot recreate specific situations and run them over and over and over again. And when Sandbox mode comes, which it has to come, because otherwise this sport is limiting itself as far as like the potential, like how far it can be taken as a sport, essentially. So when Sandbox mode comes, essentially athletes will have the ability to repeat fundamental drills in mechanics. So just, I'll get into that in the next topic. But anyway, it will allow much quicker the acquisition of skills, and it will allow people to, kind of like the way that strategy is being broken out of the box in terms of analysis. People are learning how to like understand strategies in League of Legends. Skills will acquire the same kind of thing, where you can kind of break them out of the game, and they will acquire names like the pick and roll in basketball, for example, or posting up. They'll acquire these kinds of names because they will have drills associated with them that are kind of like practicable. Okay, so let me get into that, by the way, drills. So the problem with the fact that we have to train these in a live game or a live competition setting versus drills is really one of efficiency. As you can see, it's just more efficient to repeat things in a petri dish than it is to repeat them in a game. But this has repercussions all the way down the line. So right now, probably the average age for players in League of Legends is something like 18 or 19 years old, or maybe 20. So rather young people. So these are people with a lot of time to dedicate to the training, and therefore, they're going to be able to do enough scrimmages to acquire the necessary skills to compete at the elite level. As the demographic ages, as people who are more advanced in their lives want to break into the professional scene, they're going to be limited by one aspect, and pretty much one aspect only, and that is time. Because as you age, you have more responsibilities to your family, to simply doing the finances, to figuring out healthcare on the weekends, to having relationships, raising children. And yes, in a professional sporting career, like, there's a very big imbalance. Like, people understand when they date a professional athlete or marry a professional athlete that their sport comes primarily that they're going to be sacrificing a lot for that sport. And that's been true of spouses of many professional athletes. They understand that concept. But still, these things take investment and time. And to have a life full of well-being, it's necessary to have that kind of time. So what it means to have a sandbox mode is that drills will be invented and created that allow people to more efficiently pick up the skills necessary and maintain them without investing the amount of time that is required now, which essentially means that you might play an entire match and only hit a new skill 3 or 4 times. Okay, and this is one of the reasons that skill growth drops down as you get better at the game. It's a simple exponential curve in all sports, essentially, in all performance, actually, even in music or leadership or whatever, that as you get better, it takes more and more time invested to get the next level better, essentially. And the reason that is because most of the time when you're doing the activity, you are simply repeating things you're already a master at. So the first time you play League of Legends, you walk to lane and you buy from the shop and you're like, whoa, I'm learning so much. And the 1,000th time you play it, you learn nothing when you walk to lane. You learn nothing when you're buying at the shop. So those things are no longer practice. They're simply repetition of things you already know how to do. And so that is essentially time wasted in your life because you're practicing something that's unnecessary, essentially. And that is something that drills give to essentially a professional player base, is the ability to get more and more efficient with their training, find ways to like break outside the box and do things that were impossible with the amount of time that they have, and to have a life that is a lot more well balanced, I think, than the athletes we see now, who are training like 12-hour days sometimes. And I'll give a quick example of this. It's also really important to understand that drills allow you to keep the basics while pushing the envelope of performance. So it will actually create more impressive skill in League of Legends. And Phelps is the person that I want to highlight. So Michael Phelps, when he was competing, would do a very basic drill every day. He would do a balance drill associated with kicking on his side with his arm extended in front of him. And despite the fact that he was already a master swimmer, that he had achieved mastery in his sport, he would do this incredibly basic skill-based drill every single practice, pretty much. And this is because it's something that essentially decays very rapidly with the kind of training that you're doing. So let's say that you are scrimmaging a live match in League of Legends over and over again. You have fundamental skills that are decaying while you're doing that because you're focusing on team fighting, you're focusing on the Baron, you're focusing on rotations or whatever it is you're practicing. Therefore, your basic skills decline. Your trading in lane, your last hitting, your fighting the Gromp or whatever it is. There will be, and there probably are, very basic skills, like, for example, Ezreal's skill shots, which decline rapidly as you spend time away from them, okay? And so let's say that you have a player now who can very quickly enter Sandbox mode at the beginning of the day and do a 30-minute warm-up on their 3 main champions and practice each of their skill shots 100 times in some sort of like environment where there's like scuttle crabs like running back and forth like crazy, and some of them are red and some of them are blue, and you have to hit the red ones with the skill shots or something like that. I don't know. So this would allow the repetition and upkeep of the basic skills while still training the advanced skills, which right now everybody's trying to accomplish this all at the same time, which has an impact on champion choices during scrimmages. It forces teams to consider, like, maybe we don't want to try out this new strategy because it'll mean 40 minutes of wasted time for one of our laners or 2 of our laners who are trying a new champion that we might not play. And so what if they could play Olaf instead or whatever and get more mechanical training on this champion leading up to this week's important match? Well, now all of a sudden that's taken out of the equation because they can get the mechanics training in an incredibly compacted form, which allows for pushing the envelope. So you will see a huge increase in, not a huge increase, okay, you will definitely see an increase in skill ceiling when we have a sandbox mode that allows for this kind of diverse training, okay? Finally, I want to talk about coaching. So this is something that Riot was initially pushing really strongly with the inclusion of coaches in not only the salary, but also the on-stage setting for Champion Select. And so I was quite shocked with their announcement about Sandbox mode, because that does not line up at all with their push for professional coaching. And let me explain what I mean. Coaching is a skill centered around people. When you coach a sport, you coach the athletes who play that sport. And from the fundamental level, so like as a child, all the way up through youth sport, through college sport, through pro ball, essentially what you're doing is you're developing people. You're using sport as an avenue to develop them as motivated, applied skills learners who will put in the work necessary to develop the skills. Now, the way that you train those skills is pretty much universal. Like if you go to basketball, or maybe a better example is swimming or tennis, and you will go to the semi-elite level, and you'll go all the way down to the youth level, and you'll see no matter what city you go to, no matter what court you go to, pretty much similar drills and activities like all the way through. And then you'll get to the pro level and you'll see loads of the same drills over and over and over again. Essentially what has happened is really smart people have developed really amazing drills that are incredibly efficient at developing a particular skill. And then those drills get popularized and moved around, and then the coaches are free to focus more on refinement and coaching the player, their mindset, their motivation, their application, all of the things involved with learning that go along with practicing a skill. And yes, there is a difference in coaches, like on their strategic mastery and the way that they apply that strategy to the game. But most of the like huge, what do I want to call them? Like legacies in sport that have come at the professional level, where you have coaches won championship after championship after championship. These legacies are built on their ability to manipulate people, to create in them a unity, if it's a team thing, a mindset, an approach to applying themselves to the game. But sometimes the skills and the strategies they're using are the exact same. And I think Vince Lombardi in the Green Bay Packers is a perfect example of a very transparent training process that everybody else was free to duplicate, but nobody could. Because it didn't have to do with the strategy of the game. It didn't have to do with the play that everybody knew he was going to run. It had to do with the fact that his players could do it better, because he was able to train them better, because he was able to motivate them to learn better at the very basic level with his ability to essentially coach people. So if Riot wants coaching to professionalize, they have to take it out of its current rut, which is that right now, essentially, like a coach is a sixth opinion about strategy in the game. The problem being that if they were really as good at strategy as the professional players, they might be better off being a professional player. Coaches very rarely have the full package necessary to become a pro player themselves. And so you can't expect that the person who's coaching Venus Williams or Serena Williams tennis stroke is better at doing the stroke than Serena Williams herself. Okay? So this expectation that is laden on coaches right now to become, or to like have more insight into the game than the actual player, is really self-defeating. It's really stressful for the coach, I believe, and it's really unnecessary. Because like the players should be able to rely on themselves for that kind of knowledge and development, and the coach should be able to kind of like shelter it along, guide it along in terms of development, while still enforcing a certain set of drills that they've collected from the environment. So like essentially what will happen so that's the situation now, is coaches are demanded both to be incredible experts on the game and incredible experts on people. And right now we have a massive mix. We have people who are pretty good at people and pretty crappy at the game. I think I don't want to say crappy at the game. This is a huge over-exaggeration, but let me give an example of history teacher, who I believe is a coach for, was it Team 8? I might be getting this wrong. I'm really sorry, dude. I think you're awesome, by the way. But anyway, so I think that he has a fantastic view on how to manipulate and develop people, how to give them motivation, how to counsel them. But like that's not enough right now in League of Legends, because you also have to like somehow bring this really keen sense of strategy and develop them strategically. in order to have success as a coach. Then on the other hand, you have people like maybe Peter from Team Liquid, who might be a brilliant strategist or something, but like fails to bring the team together. And I'm sorry, Team Liquid. I know that it was not a failure, but the way that you guys see it is probably obviously you see yourselves as like in a failure situation, even though you clearly did tolerably well in the season. But okay, trying to like protect people's feelings, but I'll just keep moving on. I think CLG is a good example of how they have to mix it. So they have somebody who's like a specialist in coaching, and then they found a strategic mastermind, to like play that role as well. And they're really trying to like bring both cards to the table and develop them both as much as they can, making Chris like also incredibly smart about the game, which he has a good fundamental basis for, and then also taking Tony and trying to like make him a master of motivation, essentially, And so right now I feel like that's a little bit too much to ask for in terms of like professional coaching, especially because this isn't even something that's asked for among professional coaches in traditional sport. So essentially what's going to happen when Sandbox mode comes out is this. People who are very brilliant at the game, so let me just give an example of people like Tony, maybe Monte Cristo, maybe like Link, a previous Austin, a previous mid laner from CLG, maybe people like Loco Doco will come up with drills that that other players can use to practice key pieces of strategy, like the pick and roll from basketball, or various like mechanically intensive, minute maneuvers that take place over 5 to 10 second window. So something like a wall pass in soccer or football in the rest of the world. And then a portfolio of drills will start to develop. So a portfolio of like 10 to 50 basic drills that all teams use that form the fundamental mechanics of play in League of Legends. And players or coaches will be able to go into a new position with a portfolio of these drills that everybody is aware of. And the way that they then creatively enact them in their training and the way that they coach people will make the key difference to their success as a coach on the team. And that is what the Sandbox load will allow, is this professionalization of coaching, where like everybody comes with the same diverse toolkit, and all of a sudden what makes the difference is their real coaching talent, as in their ability to coach people, and not so much like their hopeful like guessing of the strategy of the game, in the next weeks, and their ability to adapt to it, which requires tons and tons of work to keep on top of in terms of like investment in watching other regions and trying to keep on top of the strategy. So they'll be able to do that without having to focus so much on like the mechanical basics of the game. And I think that Riot should be reconsidering their concept of like Sandbox mode and what it really represents in their sport and why it is so crucial to the development of their sport. So they're really serious about esports, and I don't think that they realize really how important this is in terms of like sport development. So I really recommend that people promote Sandbox mode, share this video, obviously, and that somebody at Riot like goes and reads Alan Gutman's book From Ritual to Record and kind of gets maybe an intrinsic understanding of like, okay, what does it look like to become a sport? What is necessary to become a sport? And maybe also call a kinesiologist who specializes in how it is that motor skills are formed through your optic nerve to your brain and then out your neurons, your peripheral nervous system, to your reactions and reflexes, and like find a way to implement Sandbox mode that would be really conducive to the development of League of Legends as a sport. Thanks. See you next time. Sorry about the setting, by the way. Last time I was sitting outside in the forest. This time I'm sitting in my living room with a light behind me, which is probably not ideal. And but what can I do? This is by the way, a microphone. I don't have the pop filter, and so I apologize about any of the like poofing sounds that have occurred during this recording.